Welcome to the Prairie FILES, a true crime podcast. Disclaimer. Please note, trigger warning. This podcast contains graphic depictions of gruesome violence that may be alarming to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
Thoughts and prayers for those who have been impacted by this tragic event, those who have lost their lives. This is a terrible event, and our thoughts go out to the loved ones of those who have suffered in this event. The safety and security of our faculty, staff, and students is our first priority.
I think he should just be taken out behind a shed and put down personally, but that's my opinion. Anyways, well, he's a pretty pathetic specimen right now, that's for sure. Sad excuse for a human. It's just disgusting.
This is terrible. This is the sort of thing that you hope never occurs.
Carnage on the campus of the University of Alberta.
This was not a random attack.
The shots rang out just after midnight.
About probably 3 or 5 seconds later, there was 3 or 4 more shots fired, and the man continued to groan or scream in pain.
I was walking back to where I was studying, and that's when about 30, maybe 40 tactical members were rushing towards me with their automatic weapons, shotguns, and dog.
The shooting was believed to be part of a botched robbery at the University of Alberta's Hub Mall.
This story begins in the early evening hours of June 14th, 2012, at a modest home in Sherwood Park, Alberta. It was starting to get cloudy. Speckles of rain were misting the cool air. Rain was on its way. It was about 5 p.m. and a loud verbal disagreement broke out between a mother and her son. Something that plays out on any given day, anywhere around the world. You know, just your average mother and son verbal disagreement. But on this night, the fight was far from average. The son was Travis. He was 21 years old and seemed to be under a lot of financial pressure. He had just bought a new truck and started a new job a couple months earlier. Travis seemed on edge, and the adult life seemed to be taking its toll on him. Travis was supposed to be paying his mother rent for staying in the basement, as he was a grown man now with a full-time job. However, he seemed to be in debt to a bunch of friends, and with only 16 cents left in his bank, he couldn't possibly satisfy the demands of his creditors, mother, and the friends. Travis's mom wanted him to start paying rent bi-weekly instead of monthly, most likely so he wouldn't be able to blow his money before paying out his obligations to her. This, for whatever reason, really set Travis off. He knew he owed his friends money. Probably had a cell phone bill, possibly credit cards, a truck payment, and on top of it, his mom wanted him to pay rent, not once per month, but twice. Not to mention, he needed his next fix of synthetic marijuana, which is also called spice. Everything just seemed to be piling up. The argument got so heated, Travis's mom ended up running to her room crying just before 6 p.m. as Travis was about to leave for work. Travis would reveal how he really felt before leaving that evening. His mom would later describe how Travis transformed into a completely different person and seemed cold. And on this night, Travis would yell things like, "Don't worry, Mom, you'll get your money." Travis went on to say, "It doesn't even matter. I'm not coming home, so don't worry about it. You'll get your money," as he stormed out of the house. These words would haunt her for the rest of her life. Travis showed up for work at G4S, which is a multi-security firm, and in this case was their armored truck division that deals with the secure transfer of valuables. The compound is located at 9373 47th Street in Edmonton, Alberta. He parked his blue Ford F-150 outside of the employee compound, about a half a block south of the gate. Travis didn't get along well with his coworkers and was often in conflict, so he parked outside the compound so nobody would mess with his truck. Travis would later describe how they picked on him and he didn't really like them. Travis had only been an employee of G4S since April 12, 2012, so he had only been on the job 2 months. He was still new and hadn't even had his gun long, which was something he had been gloating about for quite some time, according to his social media posts and friends. Travis was assigned to work that evening with a larger than normal crew for training purposes. The crew was made up of Brian Elsick, who had just been working for them for 6 months and was being trained to be a custodian by Michelle Shelgelski, the trainer who was larger than life and excelled at G4S. She had 7 years experience under her belt, but some sources say 4 years. Eddie Rajano, who had recently started with G4S about 3 months ago, and also Matthew Schuman, who was experiencing his first day of on-the-job training after 2 days of working for the company. He had just been issued his revolver that day. He was ex-military, so I'm sure he was comfortable with whatever they had to throw at him. Their job that night was to replenish money in the ATMs throughout Edmonton, while Michelle also trained Travis, Matthew, and Brian. The 5 headed out on the town to do their circuit a few hours after their shift started. Michelle and Matthew were chasing in a G4S minivan, while Travis and Brian were in the back of the armored truck, with Eddie driving. All of the employees were in uniform and armed with a .38 caliber 6-shot revolver, a bulletproof vest, as well as 2 speed loaders with an additional 12 rounds of hollow point ammunition in case they come under heavy fire. Sometime just before midnight, Travis texted his buddy Dylan a chilling notion. Tonight is the night. Previously, Travis would jokingly talk about robbing G4S, and they would have a good laugh. Travis would also bombast about having a gun and how good of a shot he was. He called himself a god after apparently getting 100% on a shooting test. He started getting dark, changing his social media profile pictures to him wearing a vest, a balaclava, and sunglasses while staring down at the camera. There were some pretty big red flags, the worst of which, him saying on June 1st, 2012, "I wonder if I'd make the 6 o'clock news if I just started popping people off." This was over 10 years ago, but in today's day, I would assume an employer would be looking out for something like this. The crew made 2 unknown stops that were pretty routine that night until they got to the 3rd stop, which was the Hub Mall at the University of Alberta. Hub Mall is an indoor, combined shopping mall and student residence that spans 4 blocks, located on the University of Alberta property. It acts as a hub to multiple university resource buildings, connected through pedways and pedestrian crossings. However, this stop would be anything but routine for the G4S crew. It was about midnight, and now, June 15th, 2012, and Eddie behind the wheel of the armored truck drove around the roundabout to the north entrance and parked under the covered area as it was starting to drizzle. The van also parked. Travis, Brian, Michelle, and Matthew all entered the mall as a team. They all had each other's backs, a brotherhood and a sisterhood, if you will. They walked up the staircase and to the 2nd floor, where a bunch of bank machines are located. The TD ATM was located about 10 meters from the stairwell in the northwest corner of the building. Eddie waited outside in the G4S armored truck for their safe return. Using a key that Brian had as a training custodian, they entered a secure vault area beside the ATM and closed the heavy steel door behind them, which locks automatically. The door cannot be accessed from outside without this key that Brian had. Brian and Matthew went directly to the ATM access point inside the vault and kneeled down to start filling the ATM with money. Michelle was standing behind the two kneeling employees, observing and giving direction. Travis was behind her, standing tall, probably starting to combust on the inside, eventually reaching his boiling point. He had some animosity towards some of his co-workers for the past teasing, and earlier in the shift, there was some issues with the crew that seemed to piss him off. This, along with the argument he had with his mom, would lead to the perfect storm in his little pea head. Edmonton police would later call it the Tantrum. Within seconds, Travis drew his revolver and fired off 6 shots. The first one would hit Matthew in the left side of the head at point-blank range, blowing off a huge chunk of his skull towards the back. Next was Michelle, who he shot in the back of the head, point-blank range, execution style, killing her instantly. He then shot Brian twice in the head, also killing him instantly. During the firestorm, 2 bullets missed, went through the vestibule and ended up in the suite next to the ATM. One of the stray bullets was found in a bathtub. Travis had just committed one of the most heinous and cowardly murders in Canadian history before bursting out of the secure vault, locking his co-workers inside to die. A student who lives in the building recalls seeing a tall man in uniform running away from the scene and down the stairs after multiple pops or thuds echoed the area. With possibly ruptured eardrums, Travis quickly reloaded his .38 caliber pistol using his speed loader, giving him 6 more active rounds, ready for action. He's already cowardly shot 3 people from behind and knew there was one more threat to take care of. Travis came running outside towards the armored truck. Eddie was already outside of the truck, moving towards the building when he came to face with Travis. These tense moments will probably never be known. We don't know if any words were exchanged or if Eddie knew what Travis had just done, but before he could even draw his weapon, Travis blasted off a shot that instantly hit Eddie below his right eye, sending him to the wet pavement. A second and third shot would ring out, hitting him in the back of the head cowardly, ending his life. Eddie, 39 years old, husband and father of 2, gone just like that. Leaving Eddie in a pool of blood, Travis jumped into the armored truck and took off without looking back. Eddie was a competitive pistol shooter and worked at a shooting range called Wild West, which makes you think he was really taken by surprise by the cowardly act of his team member. The first 911 call came in at 12:12 a.m. 2 SafeWalk members, Ashley and Safira, were in the mall about halfway down the long open corridor by the library when they heard the thud coming from the north end of the mall, most likely gunshots muffled by the vault. They headed that way and eventually could hear moaning from the corner of the building and saw a pool of blood coming out from under the door next to the ATM. The moans and incoherent yelling were chilling and shocking for many of the staff and residents who started to hear the sounds. More 911 calls started pouring in. Safira, one of the SafeWalk members, which is a group that walks with students to and from their dorms at night if they feel unsafe, made their way to the first floor exit to wait for police. Luckily for them, they walked towards the thuds and didn't run, or they would have come face to face with a killer reloading a gun. The first responding officer was Sergeant Johnson, knowing the situation was going to be dire by all the pings on his computer and calls into dispatch about shots being fired. He pulled up to the north entrance and noticed a man, later identified as Eddie, laying down on the road in a pool of blood with obvious fatal gunshot wounds to his head. He rushed over to him and checked for a pulse. Sadly, he couldn't find one. There was nothing he could do for Eddie. He then saw Constable Downick arriving and checking on Eddie as well. The SafeWalk member Safira was at the door, so she led the officers into the mall, up to the ATM vestibule, where the officers seen the blood. You could hear the moans and screams for help. He tried to speak through the door, but the moans were incoherent. Johnson made the decision to quickly retreat to his car to get a battering ram that he could breach the door with. At this point, they had no idea if there was an active shooter who could ambush them, or not to mention the over 600 students who live on site that could be in great danger. This was a courageous experience officers will never forget. Once Sergeant Johnson got back to the ATM with his ram, muffled moans and screams continued, except this time, loud bangs started. Sergeant Johnson tried bashing the door with his battering ram. Over and over, he pounded the door. These sounds would echo and be etched in the minds of many Edmontonians for years. I was unable to locate the video with the moans and the banging sounds as they've been slowly taken down, but it's something many still recall, and I'd rather try to forget. Officer Dack arrived next at the north entrance with a carbine rifle. Only a certain amount of officers have these guns in their cars at the time. With the guns in circulation out there, officers many times are found to be outpowered, so all of them should have this weapon. He initially thought the bangs of the battering ram hitting the steel door were gunshots, and with his adrenaline pumping, he courageously made his way towards the bangs. A major concern on his mind was about getting into a blue-on-blue situation that could occur with other officers. Little did he know, ironically, this was a blue-on-blue situation, but of another kind. Once he carefully got to the top of the stairs, he saw Sergeant Johnson kneeling down by the ATM. Johnson was able to break a vent at the bottom of the steel door, exposing a tiny little hole and a window into the terror. He looked into the room, where he saw at least 3 bodies lying there. One was screaming. I'm sure a million things went through his mind, and more specifically, was the shooter inside the room. The ram was not quite working, so Constable Downick then ran to his car and retrieved more tools, a large pickaxe and bolt cutters. He ran back to the building with heavy tools in hand, so fast he told CTV that they felt weightless as he ran up the stairs. He was only focused on getting into that room. Once he got back to the steel door, other officers had arrived. It didn't take long to bust through the door. They formed what's called a rapid deployment team, which is when first responders will breach a dangerous or unknown space normally reserved for trained tactical units. But in exigent circumstances, they had to act fast, and it's a good thing they did. As they entered the vault, the smell of blood and gunpowder permeated the air. A lingering mist of gun smoke was still present. There was blood everywhere in the tiny room, and it was a gory mess. They saw 3 armed guards with their weapons still holstered, laying there, 2 of them motionless, and a 3rd guard incoherently screaming, with a 5th of his head missing. Brian, one of the motionless guards, was on top of Matthew, while Matthew continued to scream and say he is done for. This must have been absolutely terrifying. Officer Dack consoled Matthew and tried to explain to him everything was going to be alright. The first thing they did was pull out the 2 motionless guards from the small vestibule. They dragged them out into the hallway, so there was more room to access their injuries, leaving a gruesome blood streak that would haunt your memories for years to come. After a few seconds of checking on them, it was obvious there was nothing they were able to do. EMS described the injuries as the most catastrophic injury you can have. Michelle Shagelski, 26, had only been married for 2 months before she was killed. Brian Elsick, 35, also killed, was described as a good friend and a devoted father to his 12-year-old daughter. Police quickly turned their attention to Matthew and the massive head wound. Constable Dack and Constable Lee were attending to Matthew and providing gentle and direct pressure to the head trauma. Matthew begged officers to hurry as he was bleeding out slowly. Matthew's brain was literally hanging out. The officers in EMS were completely shocked and amazed that he was awake and even speaking to them. They were then faced with a problem. It was way too risky to carry Matthew down the stairs to the ambulance, so they were able to whisk him through the entire length of the mall to the south entrance to another waiting ambulance. The timing was perfect. Luckily for Matthew, the hospital was literally 1 block away, and he was rushed into surgery within minutes, where he would be in surgery throughout the night to repair all the damage and remove a bullet or bullet fragments that rested in his brain and skull. After relatively successful surgery, his prognosis was completely unknown. He was then put into a medical-induced coma. Officer Dax stayed with Matthew the whole time during surgery and even seized the bullet taken out of his head after the surgery. Many officers had started arriving along with Air 1 after Matthew left in the ambulance. A team was searching for other suspects and also securing the scene, where they found Eddie lying deceased not too far from the building. Many students were popping their heads out of their windows while police with guns drawn, pointed directly at them, yelled to get back inside their dorms. Shortly after multiple sweeps, they were unable to locate any threat and the scene was secured. Many students on all sides of the mall could simply look down their windows and see the chaos unfolding beneath them. Some watched in horror, while others hid in their units, far away from the window, not wanting to see what was happening. Veteran Detective Brian Robertson, who has worked more than 100 murder cases, is called and assigned to lead the investigation. He arrives on scene at the Hub Mall about an hour and a half after the initial 911 calls. He, along with other investigators, got to work fast. They were able to find out who was in the G4S crew, and by checking the name tags of all 4 of the guards at the scene, they figured out that one of the guards was missing, along with an armored truck. The missing guard was 21-year-old Travis Baumgartner. He was the 5th guard and was nowhere to be seen. At this point, they are not sure if he is dead, lying in a dark corner somewhere, a hostage, or even possibly a suspect. He was definitely the main person of interest, and they needed to speak with him immediately. Shortly after 2 a.m., the University of Alberta tweeted the first official word on the shooting. It was brief and ominous. #UAlberta, people are unharmed. Hub in lockdown. Avoid area. Later, they would get flack for not having a better system in place or any type of electronic rapid response communication that actually worked. Since this day, the University of Alberta has spent over $1 million on making it a safer place for their students. But in all honesty, nothing could have stopped this event from happening. They are now just more equipped to communicate to students in the event of any other threat. Unbeknownst to investigators or anyone at G4S, a dangerous killer was traveling east through Edmonton, probably down White Ave or 98th Ave, armed and dangerous with a bulletproof vest and a 25,000-pound weapon on wheels. It's not known if the armored truck was being tracked by G4S or if that technology was even in place back then. He was headed to his personal truck, parked near the G4S depot, which would have been a 15 to 20 minute joyride in the truck. Travis was able to make it back to his truck without detection, where he transferred 3 packages of money from the armored truck to his personal truck in a black bag. After abandoning the still idling armored truck, Travis snuck home and changed out of his bloody uniform. He also ditched his boots, which later would confirm to have the blood of Michelle and Eddie's on them. He cleaned up, changed into a white shirt, and left a large amount of money on the kitchen table, amounting to $64,000 in cash. He then stole his mother's license plate from her car and stuck it on his truck before leaving, all while his mother slept. The police did not realize this license plate swap until hours later, but were able to share the update with other jurisdictions in real time. Travis also made 2 stops at friends' houses before fleeing the city, and during those quick stops, he left them bags of money which would later be returned. The amount was unknown. Friends returned it after they heard what happened. There's no way they're touching blood money. The Edmonton police got their first lead when they ended up finding the idling G4S armored truck early in the morning just down the road from the G4S compound. By the looks of pictures in the media, another armored truck with a woman in the driver's seat is seen sitting a half a block north of the abandoned truck. They probably called it in and were ordered to stay put and not even get out of the truck because the obvious threat could be nearby. The armored truck was found parked awkwardly outside the Union Local 110 building, blocking the driveway on 47th Street just north of 93rd Avenue. They quickly seized the video footage from neighboring buildings, and they hit the jackpot. They found 2 videos of the truck. One video showing that of a lone, tall man, matching Travis's description, running and jumping into a dark-colored pickup truck. Another grainy video here shows him unloading something from an armored truck and getting into the same pickup truck and taking off. In this day and age, if you're in public, you're most likely being recorded. After an auto registry search revealed that Travis also had a registered dark-colored F-150 pickup truck, they continued to investigate Travis even deeper. They also checked his Facebook accounts and were horrified at what they found. Threats against a mayor, people who have screwed him in the past. Other threatening rhetoric would be found as well. Detective Robertson decided at this point to call Travis Baumgartner a person of interest in the case, and a manhunt to find him was on. Because of the threats from Facebook, the mayor of Edmonton at the time, Stephen Mandel, was put under protection by an armed guard stationed with him until the threat was over. The mayor of Sherwood Park was also put under protection. With the level of violence in this heinous crime, an unprecedented investigation was unfolding. Members of the Edmonton Police Service, Calgary Police Service, along with RCMP in Edmonton, Sherwood Park, Langley, BC, Canadian Border Security Agencies, and even the U.S. Homeland of Security would end up participating in the efforts to locate Travis. By 3 a.m., all law enforcement agencies were notified of his description and as the person of interest in the shooting. At this point, he was not labeled as a suspect. By 4 a.m., the RCMP had ascended on the Baumgartner home in Sherwood Park and watched the home, hoping to see if the Ford F-150 would come or go. Unfortunately, he was gone hours ago. The house was dark and there was no sign of movement. The sun was just coming up, and the public was slowly waking up to the horrors they would see on their phones and on their TV sets. Horrific acts of violence and death had occurred at the city's beloved university campus. Police would then have a media conference early in the morning to share the details with the public.
Thank you everyone for coming this morning. We are dealing today with what can only be described as a horrific act of violence. At approximately 12:10 a.m. this morning, several employees of the armored car company G4S were making a delivery to a bank located in the Hub Mall on the University of Alberta campus. At some point during the delivery, 3 of those employees were shot at a location inside the mall. A 4th employee was shot outside the mall. Of those employees, I can confirm that 3 are dead and a 4th is in hospital right now. A 5th employee is a person of interest and is part of an intense police investigation that started in the early hours this morning. Edmonton Police Service, RCMP, Canadian Border Services Agency, and U.S. Customs are looking for Travis Baumgartner, and I'll spell that last name, Baumgartner. He is a 22-year-old male born May 16, 1991, and is believed to be driving a dark blue Ford F-150 truck with the Alberta license number ZRE 724. If anyone should spot this individual or his vehicle, they should call police immediately and not approach him or contact him in any way. His involvement in this morning's shooting is not clear to us at this point, so his status to us is still a person of interest. To the many students at the University of Alberta, especially those currently living in the Hub Mall in close proximity to the crime scene, know that your residence and your university is a safe place to live and study. This was not a random attack.
Around this time, Travis's mom had also just woken up and came across the frightening and shocking sights of bloody boots at the front door and a pile of cash on the kitchen table. She then became numb when hearing of the shooting, and she called the police. She was living one of the worst nightmares any parent could have. We can only imagine what was going through her head. She had to know it was Travis. At the same time, I'm sure she was in utter denial that her son could do such a heinous thing. He didn't have a past criminal history, and as far as everyone knew, other than being a little bit weird, he was a normal young man. By early afternoon, police had changed their tune as the investigation went on. Travis was no longer a person of interest. He was the main suspect, and the public was notified. His picture was plastered everywhere, and a Canada-wide warrant was issued for 21-year-old Travis Brandon Baumgartner of Schuman, Alberta, born May 16, 1991. He is wanted for first-degree murder. They remained at the Baumgartner's home, that same home where a mother and son argument took place just hours before, watching it while the tactical officers and police dogs searched Baumgartner's neighborhood, which had been sealed off, roads blocked, and pedestrians stopped. Some residents were forced from their homes, and some were not granted access to their homes in the peaceful hamlet of Sherwood Park. Once they got the second warrant to search the house, which took a little longer than the first warrant for Travis, they entered the house, and shortly thereafter, they removed Travis's mother from the home. I am not sure at the timeline, as she would have been in the home for hours after learning of what happened and after finding the evidence. The officers may have advised her to stay put until the warrant was in place so there'd be no problems. As RCMP searched the home, they had a long list of things on the warrant they were searching for. From the court documents, they included guns and ammunition, forensic evidence of any kind related to either Travis or the victims for DNA analysis, computer hardware or software that may assist investigators in determining historic internet research used to assist in the facilitating of the occurrence, and any property belonging to G4S, including any Canadian currency. That's a mouthful. They ended up finding all of the above. The evidence was overwhelming. That same afternoon, a false sighting of Travis was reported, and SWAT teams swarmed the city center mall with guns drawn, searching for the suspect. After searching the building and doing a few sweeps, it was determined he was not there. Edmonton and even the world was captivated by the story. People became fixated on Travis, as well as the Hub Mall was trending worldwide. The United States was even shocked by the crime, and the story was all over the news down south, and even in Australia and the UK. As authorities started digging into Travis's online presence, more and more shocking details would emerge. They had already saw the threatening Facebook posts and Twitter posts, but they started finding even more creepy, self-loathing, and narcissistic behavior that would make up Travis's personality. A small window into the world of Travis's had serial killer in the making written all over it. On his dating profile of Plenty of Fish, Travis describes himself as a laid-back guy, a gentleman towards women, an avid reader of decent books. Whatever that means. I'm a great guy, he wrote. We don't come along very often, Baumgartner called himself an occasional smoker with an athletic-type body. A gentleman who would make a date feel like a princess. The ironic statements just kept rolling. My ambitions, he wrote, incorrectly spelling ambitions, is to better our world. He also wrote, I intend to become a CEO of a major corporation and use my power to help everyone I can. I am a people person. I love talking. I am easy to get to know, and I'm very laid back. The narcissism was quite evident, which is usually present in a sociopath or a psychopath, or both. Pictures on his POF profile showed him posing in a selfie shirtless in his mother's bathroom, and him sitting with friends at what appeared to be a social gathering, possibly like a campsite or something. He was also pictured wearing a black ski mask, vest, and sunglasses, peering down the camera lens. Other posts on Twitter were just him rambling on, messages to celebrities. One of his personal favorites he posted was from The Dark Knight. It stated, "Introduce a little anarchy." So at this point he was probably becoming disturbed, or was already disturbed. Unfortunately for G4S, this info was all out there. They definitely could have easily have seen it. But unfortunately, back in 2012, employers weren't checking out their employees on Facebook as much as they do today. Because if it was today, you would hope they might have been able to stop this. Especially after Travis wrote, I wonder if I'd make the 6 o'clock news if I just started popping people off. Authorities also started to piece together his offline life. He had worked numerous jobs already at his young age, which included stints in the oil patch and construction. At one job, it is reported that he had an explosion of anger and stormed out threatening to kill himself. Unfortunately, like in most cases, nobody did anything or couldn't, and his behavior started to become worse. Also, a campaign to try and join the Edmonton police force was thwarted for unknown reasons. Sergeant Johnson would later tell CTV that there is no way he would have passed the initial screening. There were too many red flags, which would have been discovered by the Edmonton police. His mother would tell media that a week before the shooting, he had emailed her the application for joining the Edmonton police force so she could print it off for him, which he would eventually later fill out, only halfway. With no post-secondary education though, he never would have been selected, or even considered for that matter. Another theme that was uncovered was it seemed like he was lying to everyone about being this great guy, who on many occasions was heard saying he's working hard to support his mother, which was completely untrue. It was her that was still supporting him. Media and police also spoke to friends of Travis's, and CTV W5 did a program on the events with his friend and ex-girlfriend being interviewed, which you can find online. It's called Armed and Dangerous. Most former friends said the similar things about Travis. He was kind of weird and liked to come to school dressed in combat or military-style clothes, and loved to smoke synthetic marijuana, which is extremely toxic. His ex-girlfriend recalled him being smart, funny, and even kind-hearted. She thought it was a joke at first when she heard about it, so you never really know what lurks in people's minds. Later that evening, about 9:30 p.m., Travis's mother, Sandra Baumgartner, released a statement through the media begging Travis to turn himself in. There had been no sightings of him for almost 24 hours, and he was on every TV across the country. He was Canada's #1 fugitive and most wanted.
We had the opportunity to speak to our suspect's mother, her name being Sandy Baumgartner, and she wanted me to read a plea to you, to the media, and to the citizens of our city, and to the rest of the people in Canada, a plea to her son to turn himself in. And I'm going to read verbatim what she said here. She said, Trav, I'm sorry that we had an argument last night and had bad words between us, but I want you to come home and do the right thing. Let's work this out together. She then stated, as your mother, I ask that you come forward now and take responsibility for your actions. Please, Travis, I love you. I'm pleading with you with all my heart to end this without further bloodshed. As your mother, I promise to you now that I will be there by your side to support you. You're not alone, Trav. Please, I love you and I want to help you. Call police now. and end this peacefully. I think it's important to state as well that Mrs. Baumgartner wanted me to pass along her sincere, deep, heartfelt sympathy to the victims' families. She would have preferred to deliver these condolences herself, but you can probably well understand she's quite upset by all of these events. She's in a state of shock, and she just wants Travis to turn himself in.
It's not known if he ever heard the plea, but later, she said while sobbing, "There is not even words to say how sorry we are for what happened to these victims." Baumgartner's father, Keith, said, "We ourselves are heartbroken and truly devastated," but no mention of the victims. During all the media attention and chaos at the Hub Mall throughout the night and into the day, Travis had actually started to run without a plan. He fled the city and was headed southwest. His exact route or plan is unknown, but according to him later, he headed to Banff first. And somewhere in the area is where he ditched the G4S issued pistol in a river. And then the bulletproof vest was discarded in another river around the area that is unknown. He would later describe how they would never be found. He mentioned they would be in the ocean by now. He fled southwest through the Rocky Mountains. In total, his trip would have been probably around 14 hours if he hadn't stopped much for any long period of time. There were no sightings of him, and he managed to make it all the way to the Abbotsford, BC area. During the initial news conference by police, Chief Rod Kinect had issued a public warning about Travis and gave his truck description with the license plate of ZRE 724. However, this was incorrect initially, as Travis had switched the plates with his mother's car. Authorities later that day learned of the switch after speaking with her, and the new plate was announced as CAA 636. This info was immediately forwarded to all jurisdictions and authorities, including the U.S. Border Patrols. This was a good call because from Abbotsford, he went south towards the border crossing on Highway 13. At around 3:08 on Saturday, June 16th, an armed and dangerous alarm went off at the Kenneth G. Ward border crossing near Lyndon, Washington. This alerted agents. Ironically, this same border station was named after a guard who was murdered there in 1979. A license plate reader had picked up Travis's mother Sandra's license plate on his truck as it headed towards the crossing with the armed and dangerous alarm warning authorities. By the time Travis's truck reached the gate, the U.S. Border Patrol officers already knew who he was, what he had done, and were ready for whatever they had to do. With guns drawn, 6 U.S. Custom agents with .40 caliber handguns did not fuck around. They quickly opened his door, ordered him out of the truck, and made an uneventful arrest.
Across the Northwest, the U.S. Border Patrol in Washington state arrested the man they say killed 3 people in an armored car heist in Canada. Authorities stopped Travis Baumgartner as he tried to cross the border in Lyndon. Police say Baumgartner shot 4 of his fellow armed guards, killing 3 at a university in Edmonton Friday.
Mr. Baumgartner was arrested peacefully and without incident, and which was the best outcome that we could have possibly hoped for. He was arrested. It's important to note that he was arrested and in custody in just under 48 hours from the time that we notified border officials and police agencies across North America early Friday morning until Saturday afternoon. The accused was still driving his 2011 Ford F-150 truck that we had notified you on continually over the last couple days. He had his mother's license plate on that truck, which was still on there. He tried to get into the border by producing his Alberta driver's license, which was his license. And he was also stopped. He had a quantity of money on him, around $330,000.
Many angles were recorded of the arrest, and American media had a frenzy. It became the U.S. version of a perp walk as authorities walked him into the holding center. In Canada, it's quite the opposite. We hide our criminals from the public. U.S. Customs and Border Protection Chief Tom Schreiber says the arrest went smoothly. We marched him away from the vehicle, laid him down on the wet pavement, I'm sorry about that, and put handcuffs on him, he recounts, with a little Canadian joke mixed in.
What happened was our officer in the booth got an instant warning that this vehicle is associated to somebody armed and dangerous. As that vehicle is coming up, the officer's going, oh no, and he has to start reacting. No weapons were found either on him or in the vehicle, but a search of the vehicle did discover a small backpack. That backpack contained roughly $330,000 in Canadian currency.
Transferring him to Canadian authorities was easy. The paperwork was minimal, and there was no extradition process, as he didn't actually cross the border. While being held by border guards, they asked him questions. Travis apparently lost his memory and had no idea what was happening. The last thing he remembers is someone putting a gun in his face, telling him to take money to Seattle. Shortly after he was transferred over to Canadian border authorities, he would expand on his bizarre story. Let's take a moment to stop and think about what just happened here. So Travis committed the disloyal and treacherous robberies by murdering in cold blood his teammates. Then with a stolen license plate, no passport, he drove right up to the authorities at the border crossing and tried to get across with his own driver's license, with his actual name on it. Not to mention, he had stacks of cash in the truck. If you look at a map of the area, you could literally just drive over a small ditch and you're now in the United States. You could drive down some back roads, eventually get onto a highway, and you'd be headed towards Seattle. What was going through his head when he decided to drive right up to the authorities makes me think he wanted to get caught, or he was really stupid. Maybe he was just tired of running without a plan. Within an hour of being detained, the RCMP was notified, and then the Edmonton police was notified. RCMP came to the border crossing to officially arrest Travis on the Canada-wide warrant. He was then transferred to Langley later that day. A team of 8, 5 detectives and 3 forensic investigators flew to Langley later that night. They were planning to go over evidence, including the suspect's vehicle, and seize any of the Canadian currency in the truck. At around 10:30 a.m. the next day, homicide detectives Jones and Roberts finally got to interview Travis in a Langley interview room, and he gave a bizarre story. He told detectives that he has amnesia, and his name is David Webb. He said he was hit on the head by a man with short blonde hair, brown eyes, and a tribal tattoo on his face, who told him he had to deliver money to someone in Seattle or his mom would be killed. They threatened him by saying that his mom was always being watched. Travis was unable to tell authorities where the money was supposed to be delivered, but the man would find him once he got to Seattle. None of it made any sense to detectives. It was completely ludicrous and completely preposterous what he was saying. In fact, it was a scene out of a movie that the detectives have both seen. It was the movie Jason Bourne with Matt Damon. The story quickly falls apart even more when Detective Jones mistakenly kept using the name Trevor instead of Travis. Travis's ego couldn't handle that and ended up correcting Jones by saying, "It's actually Travis." This was the I gotcha moment for detectives. How could he possibly go back on this now? Detectives then pressed him to tell him who he killed first. He sat there silently for hours, didn't say a word, recalled Detective Robertson. And he sat there, and he sat there, and he sat there. I think Scott asked him a second time, "Who did you kill first?" He leaned forward and quietly said, "Michelle." It was over. The beginning of the end had just started. At 4:51 p.m., he formally confessed to detectives. He admitted he had shot his 4 co-workers. He admitted to everything and gave good details of the horrific events. He said he was in a blind rage and just mad at the world. Numerous times during the interview, he would choke up, place his hands on his face, and start crying. At about 6 p.m., he was returned to his holding cell. There was also an undercover RCMP officer waiting to try and get even more information out of Travis's thick skull. His same fake cell buddy was in the holding cell before his interview, and they had chatted a little bit, just to get to know each other. As soon as Travis got back into the cell, he blurted it out, "I did it all!" Without prompting, he admitted to having killed those people and robbed their truck, he said. During the course of their lengthy discussion, Travis discussed the circumstances of the deadly robbery and that the evidence against him was insurmountable. Travis's tone and demeanor changed drastically by then. He went from a scared, crying young man while talking to the detectives hours before, but he appeared to be smug about the situation with the undercover. He said it was a .38 at point-blank range. The undercover said, "You got the jump on all four?" Travis responded, "Yeah." The undercover said, "You must be fast." And Travis chuckled a couple times, responding, "Yeah, I guess I am." They went on to talk for a couple hours, with Travis also continuing to boast about the robbery, and he went on to belittle his co-workers, saying they had no skills. He also mentioned how he didn't take into account how loud the gun would be in such a small space. He lost his hearing for a bit, he said. At one point, Travis mentioned how the mafia would be impressed. Travis made a court appearance in Langley, BC, late Sunday, June 17th, and was remanded up to 16 days to allow for his transfer back to Alberta. June 18th, 2012, the Edmonton police held a press conference. Travis was returned to Edmonton on Wednesday, June 20th. The media was tipped off that he was arriving at the municipal airport in downtown Edmonton in an RCMP plane. After the plane touched down and disappeared into a hangar at about 1:45 p.m., a group of reporters swarmed the fence line while officers kept them at bay. Police refused to talk about anything or even acknowledge Travis's arrival. Media reports a 3-car motorcade of sheriff's vehicles with rear-tinted windows leaving the area. Reporters couldn't be certain as to who was riding in the back seat behind tinted windows in one of the 3 Alberta sheriff's cars, but they were all pretty certain it was Travis Baumgartner. Through a media release, police later confirmed that Baumgartner had indeed been returned to the city and was incarcerated in the downtown Edmonton Remand Center after having been processed at police headquarters while he waits his first court appearance in Edmonton. He appeared before a judge the next day on June 21st, but was brief and had heavy security. The 21-year-old was handed a no-contact list that included his own parents. He also learned that his case would be handled personally by the Crown's chief prosecutor, Steve Bilodeau. According to the Edmonton Journal, Travis was handcuffed, shackled, and now wearing a standard blue remand-issued jumpsuit. Baumgartner appeared pale, standing in the prisoner's box. Keeping his head down for most of the proceedings, he only glanced up when Judge Lloyd Malin and lawyers spoke. In the courtroom stood 4 guards, which was doubled from the norm. In the gallery there were about 10 onlookers, mostly media, and absent were any friends and families of those involved in the deadly shooting. After the charges were read into record, defense lawyer Trent Teskey entered no plea on Baumgartner's behalf. The court records revealed Baumgartner had yet to secure a defense lawyer. Teskey told the court that he was acting as an agent for high-profile lawyer Peter Loyal, adding their law firm was acting in Baumgartner's interest for his first appearance, but not had been retained by him. On August 29, 2012, Crown prosecutors filed their request for a direct indictment in the case with Alberta Court of Queen's Bench in hopes they would be able to proceed straight to trial. A direct indictment eliminates the need for a preliminary hearing, in which is usually held to determine if there is sufficient evidence to proceed against an accused person. August 5, 2012, after numerous no-shows, Travis Baumgartner finally made his first in-person court appearance since the June 21st hearing. And it was brief and to the point. According to the last link on the left, before courtroom artists could organize their pencils, the matter was put over until August 26th, with no explanation. August 26, 2012. Trial date is set. Wearing blue prison coveralls and handcuffed, looking annoyed and agitated, Travis Baumgartner appeared in court to hear Crown Prosecutor Tanya Holland announce that a trial date had been set for September 9th, 2013. Almost a year after, on Monday, September 9th, 2013, the first day of trial began. Baumgartner pleaded guilty to first-degree murder in the death of Eddie Rajano, 2 counts of first-degree murder in the deaths of Brian Elsick and Michelle Sagalski, and guilty of 1 count of attempted murder in the shooting of Matthew Schuman. Just like that, he spared the families the time and the heartache of a grisly, drawn-out trial. For most of the court proceedings, Baumgartner, dressed in dark suit, sat with his arms crossed, slouched often, and closed his eyes for extended periods of time. His demeanor did not surprise the victims' families. The lack of remorse was quite obvious and frustrated the families. Then, on September 11th, after the Crown read the agreed statement of facts, the victim impact statements were also read. These statements were absolutely heartbreaking, and there were hours of them read out by families and friends of the involved. Many of them can be found online. The Crown then made a joint submission for sentencing. Mr. Baumgartner was asked to stand as Justice Rook spoke. I move to Section 9 on sentencing. I sentence you as follows. For the murder of Brian Elsick, a sentence with life parole ineligibility for 15 years to be served consecutively. For the murder of Eddie Rajano, a life sentence with parole ineligibility for 25 years to be served consecutively. For the murder of Michelle Shagelski, a life sentence with parole ineligibility for 15 years to be served concurrently. For the attempted murder of Matthew Schuman, a life sentence with parole ineligibility of 10 years to be served concurrently. The total sentence amounts to life imprisonment with no chance of parole for at least 40 years. These crimes constitute one of the most horrendous series of crimes for which anyone has ever been convicted in Alberta. These deaths and the injury were unspeakable, selfish acts of violence and violation of the sanctity of life and bodily preservation of victims, and also the assault on the broader community and its citizens. Justice Rook said, these crimes were brutal, yes, but at the same time, what made them even more horrendous was how they were committed, the way he broke the trust of co-workers and disposed of their lives for a chance at a few dollars. The thing that really stood out for me was the erosion of trust that occurred in the greater community and in the overall public, something that cannot be measured in prison time. Assuming Travis Baumgartner survives 40 years in prison, he could appeal to the parole board in 2052. Baumgartner would be 61 years old. Travis was given the opportunity to address the court after sentencing. Travis declined. Not at this point in time, he said in a deep voice. This was the last chance to show he was a man. At the time, this was the harshest penalty handed down since the death penalty. However, that would change a few years later. The longest sentence to date in Canada is now 75 years without parole, which has been handed down 5 times and involved triple murders.
The message to the victims' families that comes out of the 40-year sentence is that it does matter that more than one person died. It does matter that Travis Baumgartner took so much away from all of you. This is a message from Canadians and from the courts that we recognize that it's not the same and that things are going to be different because of that.
Family of the victims spoke outside of court after the sentencing.
Michelle's death made all of us into victims, and not having to think about the possibility of parole for Travis Baumgartner for 40 years takes away a burden that no one should have to bear. What comes next for us? Healing.
Ed was a big part of our lives, you know? He rose the two of us together. It's been hard. I had to move out here to Edmonton so I could be with the boys. I followed him to Alberta, coming from Ontario, so I needed to be closer to him.
My way of justice is back in the old days. Yeah, hang him. That's justice for what he did.
The last year and a bit has been a really difficult year for our family. I've seen some enormous strength in this family that I never dreamed I would ever see. These last few days have been tough as well. Sitting in the courtroom with Travis was extremely difficult.
I want to talk a little bit about the victims now. Michelle Ernst Shagalski, 26, or Mick as she was fondly nicknamed, was born in High Level, Alberta on June 29, 1985. She lived there until she moved to the University of Alberta in Edmonton at the age of 18. She was highly involved in the Royal Canadian Army Cadets throughout her teenage years and won various awards for being an excellent markswoman. She graduated from the U of A in 2007 with a Bachelor of Arts, majoring in psychology and minoring in philosophy. A relative at one point complimented her on intestinal fortitude when Michelle shaved her head as a part of a school fundraiser. In 2007 or 2008, she started with G4S as a security guard, initially during the day at a grocery store, before being transferred to the night security division. Then, eventually, she was transferred to the Armored Division. In 2009, Michelle met the man of her dreams who would eventually become her husband, Victor Shagalski. Also, an employee of G4S, seemed to make a very good impression on her. On April 21st, 2012, they had a Victorian-themed wedding at Fort Edmonton Park, and it was the best day of their lives. She had been married only 2 months when she was killed by Baumgartner. I can say without a doubt that our wedding was the best day of our lives, CTV News reported her husband Victor saying at her funeral. Michelle's beautiful funeral service was held on Tuesday, June 26th. She was laid to rest in her wedding dress. The second victim was Edgardo Eddie Rejano, 39. He was a husband and a father of 2 boys. Happy to start his job as an armed security officer at G4S Cast Solutions Canada because he aspired to be a police officer and also worked a second job as a gun range officer at the Wild West Shooting Center at West Edmonton Mall. He was a great shot and had competed at marksman tournaments, just like Michelle. Rejano, who moved to Alberta from Ontario in 2007, ultimately wanted to join the Edmonton Police Force. Jacob, who worked part-time for 2 years with Rejano at the Wild West Shooting Center at West Edmonton Mall, said, "Ever since I started working with Eddie, whenever I pulled into the parking lot and I saw his vehicle there, I smiled because I knew we'd have a good time." Staff members at the shooting center have set up a fund for Rejano that had garnered over $5,000 within days. Jacob also described Rejano, the 39-year-old father of 2, as a proud family man. A celebration of Eddie's life was held on Friday, June 22, 2012. He left behind a large extended family. Victim number 3 was Brian Curtis Elsick, 35, was born on September 16, 1976. He was described as a good friend and a devoted father to his 12-year-old daughter. Elsick's family and friends are remembering the man as having a big heart and an infectious smile. He was pretty laid back. He always thought of everybody else before himself, Elsick's friend, Salito, said. When he would invite me over to his place, it was always like, "Do you need a drink? Do you need something? Do you need supper?" He was always accommodating and always made sure everybody was taken care of. He loved his daughter. He would pretty much do whatever he could for her, he said. A trust fund was also set up to raise money for Brian's promise, a fundraiser set up for his daughter. At age 26, in the prime of his life, victim number 4 was Matthew Schuman, shot in the back of the head, putting a halt to his entire life and his career as he knew it. Schuman was a firefighter at CFB Edmonton and only worked part-time as a security guard with G4S. For the lone survival of the Hub Mall shooting and his family, June 15th, 2012 will be a day they will not soon forget. Matthew spent a total of 4 months in the hospital before returning home to his son Landon. And having spent 4 months in rehab almost daily, working towards what he hopes will be a full recovery and getting back to work as a firefighter. Matthew was still coming to terms with the fact that he was alive and the other 3 guards were not. Survival's guilt will most likely plague him forever. In Matthew Schuman's victim impact statement, he says he lost a portion of his brain from the gunshot wound. He lost feeling in his right side. He lost vision on the right side of both of his eyes. Schuman spent 3 months at the Glenrose Rehabilitation Hospital. He expanded how the shooting has affected him emotionally. He says the brain injury makes him snap at Jennifer, the mother of his child. They ended up living separately because of the stress and the outbursts. You took my career, you took my health, and you took my future. This is where the story ends. I hope you've enjoyed episode 3, The Dastardly Act. Look for upcoming episodes. We'll talk to you soon.